Okay, welcome back everyone to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we're looking into a really um, quite a powerful story that comes from some source material we've reviewed.
It really is. Starts quiet, doesn't it? Small town cafe near a military base.
Exactly, Mason, Georgia. But it unfolds into something much bigger. We're talking courage, community, dignity, really.
Yeah, those core themes.
So our mission today is basically to unpack this narrative. We want to pull out the key insights from the source, those memorable details, and figure out, why does this story hit so hard? What makes it resonate?
Makes sense. Where do we start?
Well, the source introduces us first to Grace Donnelly, and it describes her as someone you might not notice immediately, but definitely someone you'd remember. The one they remembered longest, is how the source puts it.
Quiet impact. She ran the Mason Muga Cafe right next to Fort Granger. Big Marine base there.
Right. And the source really paints a picture of this cafe. It wasn't, like, trendy or anything.
No, not at all. Strong coffee. The source mentions free refills, handwritten notes everywhere. Sounds very lived in.
It does. The source calls it a second home, a place designed so people could just, feel human again. That phrase really stood out to me.
Me too. It says so much about the need it was filling, and Grace was the key.
Absolutely. The source highlights her almost uncanny ability to remember details. Names, birthdays, deployment dates even.
Yeah, knowing who needed what coffee, but also critically knowing when to just be quiet. The source mentions that was huge for the vets.
That silence. It wasn't empty, was it? It was about holding space.
Exactly. Service beyond just the coffee. Seeing the person.
And this led to the Heroes Hour tradition the source describes. Started small, just 3 vets.
But it grew. Different eras, different conflicts, all finding a space there.
And the purpose wasn't therapy. The source is clear on that. It was, what was the quote?
To be seen, not fixed. To sit, not perform. Just powerful. A community built on respect.
Facilitated by Grace. And her connection wasn't just because the base was nearby.
No, it was deeply personal. Her husband, Staff Sergeant Michael Donnelly, he was killed in action in Afghanistan, about 6 years before the story picks up.
And his picture was in the cafe, but not a formal military one. Just him, relaxed, jeans, flannel, holding a mug.
Yeah, the source connects her work directly to her grief, pouring it into building this place that mattered, earning that quiet respect.
It wasn't about recognition for her, was it? The source calls it her mission, but it sounds almost instinctual.
It does, like pouring coffee for someone looking anxious without being asked, checking on the guy staring out the window, letting service dogs just be.
No fuss, no big deal.
Right. Operating from empathy, not a rule book. Building this sanctuary, really, one cup at a time.
So you have this haven built on Grace's quiet strength, and then the source shifts to this specific Wednesday morning. Crisp air, normal day.
Until it wasn't. Ray McMillan walks in, ex-Marine recon vet.
With his service dog, Shadow, a black lab German Shepherd mix, the source notes, wearing the vest. Service dog, do not pet, clear as day.
And Grace. Totally normal welcome. Table by the windows open. Simple, respectful.
But then,
Yeah?
trouble walks in. Logan Prescott, state health inspector, unannounced.
Clipboard in hand. The source describes him as looking allergic to joy. You get the picture.
Instantly zooms in on Shadow.
Yep. Calls the dog a violation of state health code, a food hazard, demands the dog leave.
Or he'll shut the cafe down. Just like that. High stakes.
Huge stakes. And this is where Grace really shows her mettle.
The source says she was calm, but firm, defiant even.
She points out Shadow is a registered service dog, mentions the Aiden Law, which, the source implies, is the specific state rule protecting service animals in places like this.
Covering exactly this situation.
Exactly. But then she goes beyond the legal argument. She says, I won't ask a veteran to leave, and I won't ask his service dog to leave either.
That's the line.
It is. And she adds, you're welcome to write your report, but you'll do it knowing you tried to humiliate a man who served this country in front of the very people he served to protect.
Wow. Drawing a moral line in the sand. Not just about rules.
Precisely. And just to complicate things further.
The regional manager shows up, Deborah Lyle, early for a check-in.
Terrible timing, or maybe perfect timing, depending on how you look at it later. She sees the whole thing.
And her reaction, according to the source, swift. Cold.
Immediately accuses Grace of violating policy, fires her on the spot. Pack your things, you're terminated.
Just like that. And Grace's reaction. The source described her looking around the cafe, seeing Ray, Shadow, the Heroes Hour sign.
A slight smile, almost like she knew something. Then she unties her apron, tells Lena, the barista, make sure Ray gets his refill. quiet instruction.
It just walks out into the sunlight, the source
But
notes.
someone filmed it. That's key.
Right. The source calls it a quiet act of defiance. A woman fired not because she broke a rule, but because she refused to break her soul.
That phrase captures everything, prioritizing integrity. And that video, well, it changes things.
Okay, so Grace is gone. What's the immediate aftermath in the cafe? The source describes this palpable silence, right?
Yeah, tension. Lena, the young barista, she holds firm, though. Stays at her post, trying to keep things going like Grace would want.
In Ray and Shadow.
Still there, quietly at their table. Just this heavy uncertainty hanging in the air.
Until
Yeah.
something else arrives. Something loud.
Oh, yeah. The source describes this low rumble, starts quiet, then gets louder, shaking the coffee cups.
And outside, 4 military Humvees pulling up, blocking the front of the cafe deliberately.
It's quite the image.
Yeah.
Then Colonel Richard Gaines steps out, full Marine Corps dress blues. And behind him, 24 Marines in formation.
That's a statement.
A very clear statement. He enters the cafe alone. The source emphasizes his presence, the sound of his boots. Pure authority.
And the Inspector Prescott.
Stammering, completely flustered. The colonel doesn't raise his voice, though. Calmly delivers that line the source highlights. You don't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic dignity.
Cuts right through the bureaucracies, reframes the whole thing.
Absolutely. Then Lena, the barista, she steps up, tells the colonel exactly why Grace was fired for standing up for Ray and Shadow.
And how does the colonel react to that?
The source details his response. He talks about Grace's quiet service to the base families, how she gave his Marines a place to breathe, how she treated Ray, a decorated Marine, with the respect the nation sort of promised but often forgot.
Powerful words.
And then Ray speaks. First time, the source notes. He tells the colonel, simply, how Grace never pried, never flinched, just poured coffee, gave him a place to sit, made him feel like a person again.
That personal testimony, it's devastatingly effective.
It really is. Hits harder than any regulation. Colonel Gaines then signals his Marines.
And they enter the cafe. What do?
Not aggressively, the source says, with purpose. They take down the corporate logo panel from the wall.
Okay.
And here's this incredibly symbolic detail from the source. They fold the vinyl panel like a flag.
Wow. Rejecting the corporate identity that fired her?
Exactly. And taking ownership. They replace the chalkboard sign with a hand-painted one.
What does it say?
The source quotes it, "Welcome to Grace's house, where honor is served daily."
Grace's house.
Yeah.
So they've essentially reclaimed the space in her name.
Symbolically, yes. And when the regional manager, Lyle, tries to object, Colonel Gaines just shuts it down. You've made your decision. Now we'll make ours. Oof.
It's decisive.
Totally. And right then, Lena's phone buzzes.
Another twist.
A message from Fort Granger Base Headquarters requesting Grace report there today.
So the cafe incident, it wasn't the end. It was a beginning.
Absolutely. The catalyst for the next chapter.
So Grace gets this message while she's sitting in her truck, probably reeling from the morning.
Right. The source says she feels this shift, like something bigger is starting. Unsure, but yeah, a shift.
She drives to Fort Granger, feels like an outsider, the source notes, even though she'd been a military wife.
Understandable. Colonel Gaines meets her, but he's not in the dress blues now, just a regular khaki uniform.
More approachable, maybe.
Maybe. He leads her to this room. It's unfinished. Folding chairs, whiteboards, boxes everywhere. The sign says, Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative.
A new program.
A pilot program, actually. Been trying to get off the ground for 2 years, Gaines explains. They couldn't find the right person, someone who gets veterans, not just from paperwork, but from the inside.
And he thinks that person is Grace.
He knows it, but Grace hesitates. The source captures this well. She says, I'm not a therapist. I don't have a social work degree.
Practical objections, valid concerns.
But Gaines counters powerfully. The source quotes him. But you built a place where men and women with invisible wounds came to heal. You did more with coffee and kindness than some programs do with $1 million budget.
That's quite the endorsement.
He calls what she did in the cafe leadership and service,
Yeah.
redefining qualifications based on impact, not just credentials.
And then someone else appears.
Yeah, another key moment. Tiffany Rios, a young veteran, the source describes her with burn scars, and she has an in-training service puppy, a golden retriever. She saw the video from the cafe, and she just says to Grace, simply, she thinks she could sit in a place Grace runs.
Another validation. from exactly the community they want to serve.
Exactly. More powerful than any degree. So seeing this, hearing this need, Colonel Gaines makes the formal offer. Director of the center.
Not just a title, right?
No, he emphasizes she needs to build it, shape the culture, use her instincts, her methods.
And Grace. Looking at Tiffany, thinking of Ray.
The source says she just looks at Tiffany, thinks of Ray and Shadow, all the others, and accepts. I'll do it.
A new mission indeed, born right out of that crisis.
Yeah. So the center starts to grow under Grace. And what's fascinating, according to the source, is how she runs it.
Let me guess, coffee and kindness.
Pretty much. The source says she did just what she'd always done. Consistency, kindness, paying attention, remembering names, adding them to that same notebook from the cafe.
Simple, but powerful.
Incredibly. Things like a whiteboard asking, who needs a ride? Who needs a listener? Practical, human stuff. And of course,
Dogs allowed.
dogs allowed, no questions asked. Ray and Shadow become regulars. Shadow finds his corner.
And Tiffany Rios, the young veteran.
She starts coming weekly, and the source notes she begins sketching again. A sign of healing, right there.
That's wonderful. And Lena, the barista.
She visits every Friday, brings coffee, brings laughter, helps Grace make decisions. That community spirit carried over.
That's great. But it couldn't have been all smooth sailing. Did the source mention any pushback?
Oh, definitely. Skepticism, especially from the bureaucracy. Officials questioning her lack of formal training, auditors showing up.
Asking probing questions.
Yeah, the source even mentions them testing the coffee filters.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Focusing on that instead of the people being helped.
It speaks volumes. Was there a specific confrontation?
There was. An inspector asks Grace directly about her certifications for counseling veterans.
And her response?
Classic Grace, according to the source. Simple, direct. I don't have certifications, just consistency and kindness.
Sticking to her philosophy. What happened then?
Well, despite the scrutiny, or maybe because her approach was so clearly working, the source reveals that just a week later, they get formal notice. The center is being reviewed for possible national model expansion.
Wow. So her consistency and kindness model might go national.
Looks that way. Proof that sometimes the simplest, most human approach is the most effective.
So the story circles back to the Mason Mug Cafe eventually.
It does. Grace returns quietly. And the source describes how the cafe itself carries her legacy. Photos of vets on the walls, now Ray, Hafany.
And a new sign.
Yep. Grace's corner, where no one sits alone. Her philosophy embedded in the place she had to leave.
Then she speaks at a fundraiser.
She does. And her message is basically what she lived. I didn't set out to build a program. I just refused to throw out a man and his dog.
Simple truth. How did the audience react?
The source says it was loud, long, real, and in the back, Ray, giving her a quiet salute, wearing his silver star, a moment of mutual respect.
She adds a photo of that ovation to the wall at the center.
Yeah.
Collecting these moments.
Exactly, building the story of the place visually. And then comes another big development, a letter. The Department of Defense, delivered by Colonel Gaines himself.
Okay, this sounds important.
It is. She's been nominated for the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans and an invitation to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference in D.C.
From fired cafe manager to national commendation nominee and speaker, that's quite a trajectory.
Isn't it? The source notes her nervousness about public speaking. Colonel Gaines just says, "You are now," pushing her forward again.
So she goes to D.C. What does she pack?
Lightly, the source says. A blazer, her late husband Michael's watch. And that notebook. The cafe notebook with all her notes on the vets.
Her real credentials.
That's exactly how the source frames it. And who meets her at the airport?
Let me guess. Ray and Shadow.
You got it. Ray in full dress blues this time with Shadow, her assigned escort. The source mentions their easy banter, showing that bond.
Full circle. So the speech in D.C.
Mm-hmm.
How does it go?
The source describes her voice starting small, but the room listens intently. Her speech is just authentic. I'm not a general. I didn't write policy. I managed a cafe. I served coffee. I listened.
Owning her experience.
Completely. She talks about watching something sacred happen, vets finding a place to be seen, not fixed. She mentions the firing, the turning point. But the core message the source emphasizes is it was never about coffee. It was about dignity.
Powerful. Is that the end of the D.C. part?
Almost. There's one more incredibly moving detail the source includes. After the speech, an old soldier approaches her, recognizes her from years ago.
No way.
Yeah, he shows her this grainy photo taken outside the Mason Mug years back. It's him, a much younger Michael, and Grace.
Wow. What's the story?
He tells her it was the day he got his medical discharge. felt totally lost. But her smile, the coffee she gave him, it made him feel like himself again that day. He gives her the photo.
Just proof that her quiet kindness had ripples long before anyone filmed anything.
Exactly, a hidden legacy. So she returns home, adds the DC photo and that old cafe photo to the wall at the center.
And writes something underneath?
Yes. A phrase that sort of sums it all up, according to the source. Honor grows where kindness is consistent.
Perfect, and the source ends there.
With one final image. A young vet arriving late at the center, nervous, asking, is this the place for, people like us?
And Grace's response?
No, son. This is the place for people like all of us. The source says the circle is open, welcoming, growing.
What a journey. From a small act of defiance over a cup of coffee and a service dog.
To a potential national model for veteran care, all built on dignity and consistent kindness. It really shows the power of standing by your principles, even when it's hard.
It absolutely does. And the source material really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? He presents this story not just as inspiring, but as a kind of mirror.
Makes you reflect.
So for everyone listening, reflecting on this source material, think about this. What small act of courage have you maybe witnessed, or perhaps even been part of yourself?
Yeah, where have you seen someone draw a line for what's right?
And what is that idea of standing up, like Grace did, refusing to, as the source put it, break your soul? What does that look like in your own life, in your community, maybe at work?
It doesn't have to be dramatic, does it? Sometimes it's quiet.
Exactly. And finally, how can those seemingly simple things, consistency, kindness, just paying attention, how can they build something really powerful, something lasting, something that creates that space where people feel truly seen?
It's a lot to chew on. That idea that honor really does grow where kindness is consistent.
It really is.
Yeah.
Some powerful takeaways from the source material today. Definitely worth reflecting on.